"Your dusty software," he said, laughing into his coffee cup. I was sitting across from him, holding a system uptime report that spanned 3 decades. He didn't glance at it, just chuckled like he'd just made a clever tweet. "My name is Leonard Voss. I'm 61 years old. Or 61 years operational. As I used to joke, senior systems architect at Echelon Financial Group, a position I've held longer than most of the people in that building have been legally allowed to rent a car. 30 years, to be exact. Through mergers, market crashes, the Y2K scare, and 17 CTOs, I kept the lights on. Now I was sitting across from Chase Ellison. Freshly scrubbed, freshly minted, freshly arrogant, 34, Harvard MBA, shoes that gleamed like a dealership showroom. The kind of guy who used words like synergy and disrupt and thought tech was just an app interface and a cloud budget. "I mean," he went on, grinning, "respect for the work you did, really. But let's be honest, Leonard, your kind of legacy." He said the word like it was an insult, like it meant obsolete. I glanced down at the report again. Uptime stats, system health, error recovery logs. It was all there in black and white, 99.9% over 30 years. No fanfare, no downtime headlines, just function, quiet, dependable function. Chase reached for a granola bar from his desk drawer like we were wrapping up a coffee chat. "We're going a different direction. You know how it is, fresh blood, scalable systems, agile methodologies. Ravi will be stepping into your role." He said Ravi like I should know him, like he was royalty, probably a classmate, probably another MBA who thinks DevOps is a Slack channel and not a survival skill. He's a cloud-native guy, Kubernetes, Node, serverless pipelines. He's gonna do great things here. Chase continued, "Honestly, we just need to modernize the stack. Can't keep patching over, well, dusty software." There it was again. Dusty. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. Didn't mention the disaster recovery scripts I wrote that saved the firm during the '09 power grid collapse. Didn't bring up the proprietary billing engine I designed in '97 that still processed 700 million annually without a single dollar going unaccounted. No manuals, no APIs, just lines of code written for machines that don't even exist anymore. I didn't mention the time the system flagged a misfire in account routing that would have bled us out in 6 hours if I hadn't been on call. I didn't say a word about the weekends, the holidays, the Christmas Eve when I missed my daughter's piano recital to rewrite compliance scripts when the federal reg changes hit at midnight. I just nodded once and stood up. "Cool, cool," Chase said, as if we were bros wrapping up lunch. "HR will be in touch about the offboarding stuff. You don't need to finish out the week." Of course not. I reached into my breast pocket and placed my badge gently on his desk. Then I pulled the keycard fob off my belt and set it beside the badge. He blinked at the tokens like he hadn't expected them, like I should have tried to plead, or fight, or beg for relevance. He didn't understand what he'd just unplugged. I turned and walked to the door. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. The air outside the building felt dry and electric. Late afternoon sun, throwing long shadows across the parking lot. I paused by my car, pulled out my phone, and deleted the work profile. Just like that. No panic. No anger. Just a protocol. Inside the building, somewhere behind Chase's polished desk and Ravi's cloud-native ambitions, were systems no one fully understood, codebases with no documentation, triggers written in syntax nobody teaches anymore, processes that ran not because of luck, but because I had kept them running. And now, I let go. I started the car. Let the children play. 3 days later, I was having coffee at the diner when my phone buzzed. 5 missed calls, all from the same extension. I didn't answer, refilled my mug, glanced out the window at a stretch of Arizona sky that hadn't changed since 1986, and stirred in 2 sugars. The world was calm, clean, predictable, which made the chaos behind those missed calls feel even louder. The 6th call came in while I was folding the sports section. I let it ring. No voicemail, Chase's number never left voicemails. MBA types don't like leaving evidence. The waitress topped off my cup. "You finally retired, Leonard?" "Something like that." She smiled, not pressing. I liked that about this place. No one needed to be important here. Back at Echelon, though, importance was burning down. I found out an hour later, through an old colleague who never deleted me from his private email list. System-wide misbilling had begun overnight, $18 million yanked from a Tier 1 client in Hamburg. Auto-debit failed to check the override flags. No human verification, no delay logic, just raw transfer, straight out of the client's treasury. Phones were reportedly screaming. Support was triaging a dozen other incidents. Quarterly reports wrong. Tax outputs misaligned. Payroll queues corrupted. Customers locked out of their own dashboards. One major vendor had already sent a breach of contract notice. And still, I didn't answer. I baited a hook and went fishing. It wasn't pleasure fishing. I didn't expect a catch. I just wanted to sit on the riverbank with my thermos and let the wind pass over me. Let the systems fail. Let the architecture hum out its final breath without me holding the wires together. By late afternoon, I got a forwarded message from an old friend in the compliance office. Said Ravi was telling execs the failure was inevitable, that the system was already fragile when he took over. Legacy code. Outdated dependencies. A mess waiting to collapse. No mention of me by name. But the implication was clear. I smiled and sipped from my thermos. Back home, I powered up my workstation. The one in my basement. Off-network. Hardened. My private clone environment. Not a backup, just muscle memory. I'd built a sandbox years ago, a mirrored simulation of Echelon's core stack, compiled from config snapshots, test data, dummy accounts, something I used to experiment when I couldn't risk touching prod. They never knew it existed. I logged in. The replica flickered to life. Every daemon booted clean. System health. Green. Billing engine. Stable. Recovery triggers. Intact. I ran a trace on the update protocol. Ravi had introduced microservices stacked on fragile scaffolding. Improper inheritance. No rollbacks. The moment a single token misfired, the whole stack would tip. Not sabotage, just preparation. I wasn't going to touch anything. I wasn't going to fix their failure. I was done. But I would watch. Over the next 24 hours, 3 more clients reported losses. Finance went into lockdown. Legal prepared disclosure memos. The board called an emergency meeting. Ravi stopped speaking publicly. Chase issued a statement about unexpected legacy challenges. The word legacy had turned from a punchline to a scapegoat. They were hemorrhaging, and I was calm. I ran a diagnostic inside my clone. It responded instantly. The old tool still knew my fingerprints. Every command I typed worked as it always had. The environment was quiet, like walking through an abandoned aircraft hangar where every rivet was once hand-tightened. I stared at the logs until the sun dipped below the blinds. They thought they'd replace dusty software. But I wasn't software. I was the compiler. They'd started a war with someone who wrote the battlefield. I never deleted my credentials. They assumed a deactivation form was enough. But legacy systems obey older rules. The new stack Ravi and his team were patching together was all surface. Pretty dashboards, animated status bars, real-time metrics piped into Slack channels. But underneath, the foundation still pulsed with old architecture, my architecture. Buried in the belly of the system was code written 25 years ago. Lines I knew by sight. Subroutines I'd memorized like scripture. They couldn't erase that with a click. They didn't even know where to look. Back in my private environment, the clone ran with surgical clarity. Every change they made, upstream, registered downstream like seismic tremors. I sat in my basement office, coffee gone cold beside me, watching the logs roll in. At 3:42 a.m., I saw it. A reconciliation process from Ravi's cloud layer tried to write to the legacy billing database. But the format was wrong, 64-bit floats crammed into a 32-bit column. The write failed, silently. Then the retry triggered. Again, again. On loop. 10,000 entries queued in less than 6 minutes. Error suppression buried the faults. No alerts fired. On paper, everything looked stable. But that loop wasn't just failing, it was poisoning the database with corrupted ghost transactions. I leaned back in my chair and laced my fingers behind my head. They were welding a Tesla engine onto a steam locomotive and acting surprised when the wheels buckled. I could have fixed it. It would have taken 12 lines of code. But they didn't want me. Didn't need me. So I did what legacy systems are best at. I waited. By noon the next day, the accounting dashboard began throwing false positives. Assets duplicated, debits vanished, credits tripled. Payment pipelines were one malformed trigger away from full collapse. The system hadn't crashed yet, it was worse than that. It was lying. And lies compound interest. I wrote a single message. No greeting, no sign-off. Just one sentence, sent through an encrypted Proton Mail alias to the CFO's executive assistant. You're 7 hours away from a reporting error large enough to trigger an SEC audit. Your new stack is bypassing parity checks on the legacy billing engine. Fix it or flag it. I watched the clock. 46 minutes later, a compliance directive went out from the CFO's office. All financial data pipelines to undergo audit review immediately. Freeze on payment pushes until discrepancies are reconciled. Translation. Panic. By end of day, Chase was seen pacing the mezzanine offices, sleeves rolled up, tie undone. Ravi was nowhere to be found. I imagined him buried in JSON files, praying the stack would stabilize, not realizing the error wasn't in the cloud. It was in the interface, the thing they dismissed, deprecated, and cut me out of. Back in my clone, I ran a simulation of what would have happened had the loop continued unthrottled for another 6 hours. Result: $42 million in phantom payments routed to zeroed accounts, enough to trip a federal inquiry, enough to end careers. They never even knew how close they came. My name didn't come up, not once. The ghost doesn't get credit. The ghost doesn't get blamed. I wasn't in the building, on the payroll, or listed in any deployment log, but the system still knew me. And I knew every crack they were trying to plaster over with swagger and budget decks. They'd confused flash for architecture, gloss for grit, built a palace on top of a landmine. And I had the detonator. I didn't need revenge. Just truth. And truth, when written in logs, is immutable. The outage hit on a Thursday morning, 8:17 a.m. Eastern Time. That mattered, because it meant New York, London, and Frankfurt were all live. Echelon's global payment network didn't stagger by region. It fired on all cylinders at once, synchronized like a heartbeat, until it stopped. Payroll transactions froze mid-push. Vendor contracts defaulted on automated triggers. Internal expense accounts locked up like rusted valves. Wasn't a crash. It was worse. It was a system-wide seizure, everything awake but paralyzed. No one saw it coming. Not Ravi, who was still trying to stitch his Kubernetes vision into a mainframe that predated half the engineering team. Not Chase, who'd sold the board on modernization by Q3 and proudly called legacy systems tech debt with a beard. I wasn't watching live. I didn't need to. I knew what they'd broken days ago. But word travels fast when panic spreads. An old friend from inside finance texted me 2 words: full blackout. I finished my coffee, wiped the rim of the cup with a napkin, and pulled a small black flash drive from the drawer. It had sat untouched for weeks. Labeled in Sharpie, uptime, at 11:32 a.m. I mailed it to the board's private P.O. box. No return address, just a note tucked inside the envelope that read, "Uptime isn't luck." By noon, the emergency audit was underway. The internal compliance team moved like a SWAT unit cordoning off access, pulling logs, interviewing engineers. They didn't have to dig far. Ravi had pushed an untested update to production at 2:09 a.m. the night before. No sandbox, no rollback. He'd overwritten part of the legacy billing schema with cloud-first architecture that wasn't backwards compatible. It was the equivalent of bolting a fiber optic node into a rotary phone and wondering why no one could dial out. The violation alone was enough to trigger 3 internal policy breaches, each with automatic escalation to legal. By 2 p.m., Echelon's in-house counsel was on a call with the SEC. That night, the company's stock dipped 11%. Analysts cited technical instability and exposure risk. I called it gravity. The board met early Friday morning behind closed doors. By then, the flash drive had arrived. It wasn't flashy. Just a static build of the full original system map, annotated dependencies, proof of uptime history, and a PDF folder titled Ignored Warnings. Inside, screenshots of emails, archived tickets, and project outlines from the year prior. Some were from me, others from engineers who'd raised red flags and been told to trust the new process. They had trusted it, and the new process had detonated in their hands. By noon, Ravi was walked out with a cardboard box in his arms. Word was, no severance. Just a pink slip and a locked badge. Chase was suspended pending further review. His fate resting on how much of this mess he'd greenlit and how much he'd just failed to understand. Knowing Chase, it was both. I said nothing. I wrote nothing. No emails, no texts, no smug I told you so's. My fingerprints weren't on any of it. They didn't need to be. I wasn't retaliating. I wasn't clawing back a job or a title. I was a ghost, and ghosts don't beg for recognition. They leave the truth behind, like cold air in a sealed room. There was no press release. No public scandal. Just quiet replacement, updated org charts, and an internal memo about infrastructure stabilization. They'd try to spin it as growing pains, maybe even innovation. Let them. In my clone environment, the original build hummed without issue. No corruption. No overwritten logic. Just the same stable backbone that had carried Echelon through wars, recessions, and tech booms. They wanted a clean slate. I gave them one. The board called me back, offered a consultancy. I declined. I already built my legacy. I came to finish theirs. They phrased it like a lifeline. Short-term contract. Advisory only. Help us stabilize the stack and transition the legacy systems properly. A polite translation. Clean up the mess they made trying to erase me. They dangled numbers, 2 consulting rates higher than my old salary, executive access, even an open door to rebuild the team under my direction. What they didn't understand, even now, was that I didn't need to come back. I already had everything I needed. Instead, I scheduled a quiet meeting with the Regulatory Compliance Committee. Just 3 people in a glass-walled conference room in a government building that smelled like recycled paper and air conditioning coils. No lawyers. No company badge. Just a manila folder and my name on the visitor log. I gave them everything. Raw logs, email threads, code diffs, evidence of falsified uptime reports, performance metrics padded with temporary load balancers, sandbox tests reported as live production, procurement approvals signed without vendor validation, and a single document. A timeline cross-referencing system failures with Chase's monthly reports to the board. Each report, clean, polished, fraudulent. They listened, took notes, asked 3 questions. I answered each one clearly, factually. No venom in my voice, no smugness in my tone. Just a technician stating conditions. When I left, they shook my hand. By the following week, the SEC inquiry was confirmed. Not internal, not sealed, public. Headlines started slow, industry publications, compliance blogs, niche investor alerts. But Chase's name was attached now. So was Echelon's. The market doesn't blink at outages, but it stares hard at deception, especially when it's tied to finance. Chase was terminated the next morning. Not suspended, not mutually separated. Terminated. The release was blunt. Violation of internal controls. Breach of trust. His LinkedIn went quiet. Comments disappeared. By week's end, so had his face from Echelon's executive page, a vapor trail where ego used to sit. I walked through the office one last time. They'd issued me a one-day guest badge. No escort, no meetings. Just quiet permission to collect the few personal items I hadn't already forgotten. The place felt hollow. No hum of servers. Just fluorescent lights humming to themselves and an open floor plan that smelled like recycled ambition. I passed the corner where my old cube used to be. Someone had removed the monitor arm, but left the adhesive pad on the desk. It peeled at the edges, curling like dried skin. Across the aisle, someone had taped a fun fact poster to the wall. I didn't read it. I stepped into the elevator, wrote it down without a word, and exited through the lobby. The receptionist didn't recognize me. Back home, I went into the basement. The clone environment was still running, clean, stable, a monument really, to an era that no longer needed remembering. No alerts, no errors, just the quiet pulse of uptime, ticking like a clock no one checked anymore. I sat down, opened the shell. 3 commands. The first shut down the system. The second deleted the instance. The third purged every backup stored locally and remotely. No shadows, no ghosts. Just silence. The screen went black. 30 years of architecture. Deleted in 3 keystrokes. You only call something dusty when you don't understand what keeps the lights on. I stood up, closed the lid of the laptop, and felt the silence settle around me like fresh air after a long storm. No fanfare, no headlines, no ceremony, just the end of a line written clean. We always think the new code is better, shinier, faster. But systems don't care about age. They care about reliability, integrity, truth. And when truth gets overwritten enough times, it doesn't crash, it just disappears quietly, waiting to be rediscovered by someone who still knows what it means. Sometimes it's just a checkbox in a spreadsheet. Real revenge is never personal. It's just clarity. Code compiles, logs don't lie, and every legacy has its final build.